Hello, everybody. So we are here with a very special guest. You asked for him and you got him. It's our very own Mr. Barry.
Hello, everybody.
So, Mr. Barry, we're going to talk about rounding today. So, one good question is, why do we need to know how to round?
Rounding is very important because it helps us estimate, which means that we are making a close guess. And after we've rounded, it allows us to do mental math so that we don't have to write things out. We can do things in our head. And I know that a lot of you like to do things in your head. So the better you get at rounding, the easier that becomes.
Oh, that makes sense. So, it just kind of gets us in the ballpark, so
Right,
to speak.
right.
All right. So, let's take a look here.
Okay, so in this example, we are asking you to round the number 87,659 to the nearest 10. And it says nearest tens place, but that's the same as saying round to the nearest 10. So what we have learned to do is first we're going to find the digit in the place that we are rounding to. And it is asking us to round to the nearest 10. So we're going to locate the tens place, and in this number, 5 is in the tens place. So I'm going to underline the 5. That way I can remember which place I'm actually rounding. Now, a couple things. Once we've underlined that digit, and in this case it's a 5, we know that that's either going to stay a 5 or it's going to go up by 1 and become a 6. It's not going to go down and it's not going to go up by more than 1. Our next step is to go to the digit just to the right, in this case the ones place, put a box around that. We're going to call that our boss. And our boss is going to tell us what to do with the tens place in this case. So we've learned a rhyme for our boss. If our boss is 4 or less, we let it rest. And if it's 5 or more, we raise the score. So in this example, our boss is a 9, which would be 5 or more, which means that we are going to take our 5 and turn it into a 6.
That sounds great. So, do you want to go ahead and write out what that would become for us?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Barry?
One thing I forgot to mention is once you have boxed the boss, you should automatically know that your boss, and if there's anything that comes after your boss, automatically turns into a 0. Like we said, our boss was 5 or more, so we know that the 5 is going to round up. We're going to raise the score to a 6. And everything before that is going to stay the same. So 87,659 rounded to the nearest 10 becomes 87,660.
And if I think that's awesome. The one thing that I was thinking of as you were doing a great job of explaining it, 87,659 is closer to 87,660, what you wrote, than it is 87,650. So it's
Exactly.
closer to the 60.
Exactly.
Nice work, Mr. Barry. What was that rhyme again?
4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score.
Now, can we hear it as a song? Can you?
4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score.
Awesome. Let's do. Do you have time to do another one with
Yes,
us, Mr.
sir.
Barry?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
So, round to the nearest hundreds place.
Okay, so in this case, we're not rounding to the nearest 10. We're going to round to the nearest 100. So if you remember from our last example, we need to find the hundreds place. And in this number, that would be the 4. And then we are going to put a box around the digit after it, which is the 8. Now, like we said before, we know that our boss and everything after that is going to become a 0. So in this number, we know, or we should know, that we are automatically going to have 2 zeros at the end of the number. Now we have to decide what we do with our 4. So we look at our boss. Our boss is an 8. And again, our rhyme is 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score. 8 is in the 5 or more category. So we know that our 4 is going to round up to a 5. This 2 is going to stay the same. This 5 is going to stay the same. So we end up with 52,500. Like Mr. Stevens said on the last slide, 52,487 is closer to 52,500 500 than it is to 52,400. And since we are rounding to the nearest hundred, that's actually what we were trying to figure out.
Now, before we look at the next one, if you have time for another one, can we hear the rhyme in rap form?
I am not good enough to do that, but I can say it fast.
Okay, let's try to say it fast.
This goes for the boss. 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, let's look at rounding to the 10,000s place.
Okay, so we haven't mentioned it in this video yet, but if you've watched some of the other videos, at this point you might want to try to pause this video and try this one on your own, and then you can watch the video to see if you did everything right. The trickiest part with this one is locating the 10,000s place. So you've got ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. So at first we are going to underline the 10,000s place, which is a 2, and we're going to box the digit after it, which is a 4. So what we're really trying to decide here is if this number, 24,563, is closer to 20,000 or 30,000. So that's really what we're trying to decide, because those numbers are easy to work with in our heads, but this number, 24,563, is not an easy number to work with in your head. So first things first, we know automatically that our boss and everything behind it becomes 0. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. We just have to decide what to do with the 2. So we look at our boss, and it's a 4. So if you remember our rhyme, 4 or less, we let this digit rest. So the 2 is going to stay as a 2. And then we have just discovered that 24,563 rounded to the nearest 10,000 would become 20,000.
Excellent. So, Mr. Berry, what you're telling me is we were looking at if this is closer to 20,000 or 30,000.
Yes, sir.
And then the reason that these all become zeros, we need these as placeholders, right?
Yes.
That placeholder is going to, oh, geez, there's the handwriting. Sorry, everybody. Placeholders. So the only reason we need these zeros is to keep that 2 in the 10,000s place.
Correct.
Okay, excellent.
Also, zeros, if you think about it, we talked about estimation at the beginning and trying to do things in our head. Zeros are really easy to work with in your head, but if you look at the original number, 4, 5, 6, 3, those are not easy numbers to work with in your head.
Yeah. Okay, so before we go on to the next problem, can we hear the rhyme like a polka band might sing it?
I think Mr. Stevens should try this one. If he remembers the rhyme. Let's see if he remembers the rhyme.
A 4 or less, let it rest. I don't know. 5 or more, raise the score.
Very good.
All right, that's not bad for a polka. All right. Next one, let's look at rounding to the nearest tens place again.
Okay, so once again, we are going to find the tens place first. And right here we have a 0. I'm glad this example popped up because sometimes we kind of forget what we're doing if we see a 0 because we're not used to that. So what we're going to decide here in the end is if our tens place should be a 0 or a 1. Because remember, it either stays the same or it goes up by 1. We're going to put a box around the 6. That's our boss. We should know automatically that our boss is going to turn into a 0. That sort of looks like a 6, but I promise it's a 0. If you remember our rhyme, 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score. This is a 6, so that would fall in the 5 or more category. Our 0 is we're gonna raise that score. It's gonna become a 1. 5 is gonna stay the same. 9 is gonna stay the same. 8 is gonna stay the same. So we just figured out that 89,506 to the nearest 10 would become 89,510 because it's closer to 89,510 than it is to 89,500.
All right, so I think we're about out of time. So let's go out on a high note. Mr. Berry, could you do the rhyme like a reggae band might do it?
I've got to think about this one for a minute. I don't think I'm that talented.
Okay.
I don't think I am.
All right, well then let's just hear the regular rhyme one more time and we will call it a rest.
So the rhyme for remembering if you leave the digit you've underlined alone or if you raise it is...
You say it and then I'll try to reggae.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
5 or more, raise the score.
5 or more. You got to raise the score.
4 or less, let it rest.
4 or less. You better let it rest. All right, we nailed it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, everybody.